By far, one of the biggest storylines of the 2024 NBA offseason is going to be the future of Donovan Mitchell with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And day by day, this is a situation that just continues to get weirder and weirder. Quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, PrizePicks. And with the playoffs coming up, with the tournament still going on as well, there is so much basketball going on right now. And PrizePicks is an awesome way to enhance your watching experience. All you do is you go into PrizePicks and you pick between 2 and 6 selections, and you pick more or less for each of these numbers. It's just you against the numbers, and if you get them correct, you win some cash. To get you started, you can get a 100% deposit match up to $100 when you use code SPORTING, and that link is in the description. But it's not just that. PrizePicks is doing promotions all the time. They've got these demons and goblins numbers as well. The red ones are more difficult to get, but increase your payout, whereas the green ones are easier to get, but give you a little bit of a lower payout. And again, you can just put all those together, put together your selection, and if you feel like you have a decent idea of what might happen in a given game, and you want to add a little bit more to your viewing experience with any kind of basketball, any sport you have coming up, PrizePicks has so many options, promotions, and again, that 100% deposit match up to $100 when you use code SPORTING. You click the link in the description as well. Hope you guys have fun with PrizePicks, and thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now, if you don't know, here's the situation with Donovan Mitchell. A couple years ago, Cleveland trades a ton of stuff in exchange for him. They bring him in alongside Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, this nice group of players that had a really good season a year before. Donovan Mitchell, they see as the piece that's going to potentially put them over the top. He's signed for a couple of years. They had a pretty good first season with Donovan Mitchell. The problem is they were terrible in the postseason. They only won one game. Now we go into the year this year, and this has just been a very weird season for Cleveland in terms of the Donovan Mitchell situation specifically, because the best version that we saw of the Cavs this season was actually when Evan Mobley and Darius Garland were both hurt. At that point, when those guys got hurt and Cleveland was just kind of an okay team, I kind of thought the season might be over for the Cavs, but suddenly they won like 14 of 16 games with just Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen leading them. And then once those two guys came back, Garland and Mobley, they've kind of gone back to just being fine. Now, granted, the schedule during the time period in which Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen were kind of leading the team, it wasn't, the toughest schedule of all time or anything, and that certainly had a part to play in it, but it's just weird how poor the fit of those four guys together has been and how good it has looked at times when it is just Donovan Mitchell's team. And all of this comes together in a offseason in which Donovan Mitchell will be entering the final year of his contract. He's going to be a 2025 free agent by all likelihood, and the Cavs have come out and said publicly that they're confident Donovan Mitchell is going to sign an extension and remain a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Donovan Mitchell's come out publicly and said that he's not really worried about the extension. He's not focused on that right now. It's something he'll deal with in the offseason. And if he doesn't sign an extension in the offseason, the Cavs are ready and willing to give him a max contract offer, as they should. If he doesn't sign the extension in the offseason, the clock starts to tick, because then all of a sudden, if you're Cleveland, you're going into a situation where the following year, you know that you could lose Donovan Mitchell for nothing in free agency, and you know that there's the possibility of him leaving for a variety of different teams out there. It's a very tough situation for the Cavs to be in, because one of the best ways you can potentially try and get Donovan Mitchell to stay is by having a really successful season, right? And especially in the postseason. And they weren't a good playoff team last year. And even though they're going to have the opportunity to have a good postseason, they're still one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. History tells us, history being literally only last year, that that will not be the case. And if they suffer a disappointment in the first round, or they only win one round in the playoffs, questions are going to start to swirl immediately about the future of Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. And two different things are going to happen, right? Either they're going to look at changing the roster around Donovan Mitchell, potentially trading away Evan Mobley, potentially trading away Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, whatever the case may be, to try and make this a better championship contending team in Donovan Mitchell's final year in Cleveland, and then try and re-sign him in 2025. Or, again, assuming that he doesn't sign the extension this offseason, Donovan Mitchell then is just going to potentially be a trade target suddenly for all these other teams around the league. Because if you're Cleveland, it would be a very risky move. They know this very well with the LeBron era. It would be a very risky move to go into the season with a similar roster as what we saw last year, and then potentially what they do in the playoffs this year, and Donovan Mitchell have the opportunity to leave straight up as a free agent for absolutely nothing in return in the 2025 offseason. And this is just one of those situations that teams get into sometimes that is basically impossible to find a good solution to, because I personally would be shocked if Donovan Mitchell signs an extension with Cleveland this offseason, almost regardless of what they do in the playoffs. Unless they make the finals or something, I would be completely shocked if he didn't at least take the opportunity to be a 2025 free agent. And Cleveland knew that this was a possibility when they traded for Donovan Mitchell in the first place. It was definitely a big swing for them. They were coming off of a pretty good good season the year before. They felt like they had a young group that they could elevate with another creator like Donovan Mitchell, and they knew they only had him under contract for a few seasons. They knew that 2025 was always going to be an option for him, and of course they know that they are not a destination team. And if you have the opportunity to potentially go play in New York or Brooklyn or Miami or Los Angeles, there's going to be opportunities for him to be able to do that in free agency or potentially via a sign and trade. They knew all of these things. They just felt like the risk was worth it. And now they're looking at a potential nightmare scenario of not having any direction whatsoever in what's going to happen with Donovan Mitchell in the offseason, and then having to go into the season not knowing anything either. And to me, almost the more interesting scenario here would be if Cleveland, didn't perform well in the postseason, but still believes that Donovan Mitchell is going to stay with them long term, and maybe looks at options on their roster to improve that don't involve trading away Donovan Mitchell. Because you could certainly argue that if Donovan Mitchell wasn't there, if they never made the trade, they still would kind of just be that like 45 to 48 win team that they kind of are now with Donovan Mitchell on the roster. And it's just this weird parallel between who they were before Mitchell got there and who they are now that he's there, and the fit of all four of these guys together. I mean, individually, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen are all very, very good. They all do a couple of things really, really well, but it's clear that they just can't get the fit of those guys, whether it be in the front court with the two bigs or the back court with the two guards. They can't get any kind of fit figured out, regardless of the talent level of the team. I think generally speaking, they're a very talented team, and there's adjustments you can make, right? They tried to bring in complementary players this past offseason, which for the most part, I think has worked, especially the Max Strus signing. And you can, make an adjustment with the coach. You can change up all these different things, but ultimately for Cleveland, they've just put themselves in a situation that is very difficult to find their way out of without trading away Donovan Mitchell to some team this offseason that's willing to give up some stuff. Here's the problem though. They're going to get less for Donovan Mitchell this offseason if they were to trade him than they traded away for him when they got him from Utah, because the list of teams that Donovan Mitchell can go to is very, very small, because he has the opportunity to force his way out in 2025 if he wants to. And so it's already narrowed down to some of those bigger market teams you would presume that he would automatically re-sign with once he got traded to. But also, those teams are not going to be willing to give up as much, even because it is a possible one-year rental if they don't get that guarantee that Mitchell is going to want to stay. And obviously, again, Cleveland knew this. They knew that this was a risk when they traded for Mitchell in the first place. But in the scenario in which Utah had the opportunity to trade away Donovan Mitchell when he was on a one-year contract, he wouldn't have ended up in Cleveland. Like, that's the situation that we're in now, where Cleveland would not have been on the list. It would have been some of these bigger market teams, presumably at least. And now that's the situation that Cleveland is going to find themselves in. And honestly, it's unfortunate because I think there's some cool stuff that the Cavs could do with their roster and the things that they could be, and they're still really talented. And Mitchell is an incredible player. And when he got traded to Cleveland, I was hopeful that it was going to lead to this shift in mindset amongst stars in the NBA that are, making trade requests or getting traded, and thinking about, okay, what's the better basketball situation for me, right? Because at the time, it was basically the Knicks, and then the Cavs came in there. There were a couple of other options, and Cleveland was the best basketball situation for Donovan Mitchell to go to in terms of the complementary pieces, in terms of the supporting cast. And obviously, he didn't make the choice, but I'm sure he okayed the trade. And going to Cleveland, I thought potentially could allow some of these smaller market teams over the following few seasons, Memphis, New Orleans, that have all these pieces, that have all these assets that can create a really good basketball situation. I thought it could potentially lead to stars getting traded to places like that more often, rather than always ending up in the same handful of markets like New York and LA and Miami and potentially Texas sometimes. I wish, or I had high hopes that was going to be kind of a shift. I have a video about this, a shift in the way that players thought about where they would end up in possible trade situations. And if he ends up going to one of those bigger markets anyway a few years later, and Cleveland is worse off for it, obviously that is not going to be the case. And there's so many variables with this. It depends on how the Cavs do in the postseason, depends on whether he signs the extension, depends on what teams want to trade for him, it depends on how much Cleveland wants to get in exchange, or whether they want to just go into the season. And it is an incredibly difficult situation if you're a Cavs fan to try and figure out what the team is going to look like 3 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now. Everything is on the table for them. The fortunate thing for Cleveland, in comparison to other teams that have dealt with this in the past, is that assuming they keep all of their guys and Donovan Mitchell leaves as a free agent or they trade him away, they still have a foundation of three really, really good players in Garland, Mobley, and Allen. And it's not like Donovan Mitchell leaving for nothing or not getting as much in a trade as you'd like completely ruins their franchise, but it would be a significant blow and something that they, I'm sure, really don't want to have happen. So we will see what happens in the offseason, but I am incredibly interested to see how all this works out in Cleveland.